Westridge Enterprises wanted Samuel Harrison's fifth-generation homestead for a luxury resort. They had senators, judges, and millions in their pocket. Sam had only his weathered hands and a deed turning yellow with age. 3 days to clear. Out, the corporate woman said, dropping a manila envelope at his feet. That evening, as Sam sat broken on his front step, dust kicked up on his gravel road. Not sedans, tactical vehicles. 7 figures emerged in the dusk, moving with military precision. "Mr. Harrison," their leader said firmly, "we understand you've got a situation that needs addressing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Samuel Harrison's orchard wasn't just his livelihood. It was his heritage, his identity, and the culmination of 5 generations of family dreams. Every morning for 35 years, he'd rise before the sun to tend to the apple trees his great-grandfather had first planted in 1920. The ancient red barn still had his children's handprints pressed into the concrete foundation from when they were small. His late wife, Katherine, had planted the rose garden by the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property. At 63, Sam's face was a roadmap of weather lines and laugh creases. His hands, calloused and strong, knew every inch of his 125 acres by touch alone. The orchard stretched across rolling hills in the northern part of Riverview County, its soil particularly suited for the heirloom apple varieties the Harrisons had cultivated for generations. "This land speaks to me," Sam often told his neighbor Elijah during their Sunday coffee on the wraparound porch his grandfather had built. "My ancestors are buried on that hillside. My children took their first steps under that maple tree. Katherine and I danced under those stars on our wedding night. The soil here knows my family's touch." The main farmhouse, a sturdy 2-story structure of stone and timber, had been expanded by each generation. Sam's father had added the east wing in the 1950s. Sam himself had renovated the kitchen where Katherine had taught their daughter Leanne to bake the Harrison family's famous apple pies. Every corner held a memory, every field a story. The Harrison orchard was famous throughout Riverview County and beyond. Their apple cider had won the State Fair Blue Ribbon 14 years running, and the Autumn Harvest Festival brought visitors from 3 states away. Local schools made field trips to learn about sustainable farming practices that Sam had pioneered in the region. Combining his grandfather's wisdom with modern techniques he'd studied at agricultural college. "Your daddy would be proud, Sheriff," Wilson told Sam one autumn day as they watched schoolchildren picking apples from the visitor rows. "He always said this land was meant for community, not just commerce." Sam didn't care about getting rich. He'd turned down developers twice in the past decade. The first offer had come from a national grocery chain wanting to build a distribution center. The second, more substantial offer had come from a golf course developer who'd envisioned the rolling hills covered in putting greens instead of apple trees. "Not interested," Sam had told them both without hesitation. "This land isn't for sale at any price." All he wanted was to keep working his orchard, sharing its bounty with the community, and eventually pass it to his son Mark, who was finishing agricultural college next year. Mark had his father's hands and his mother's gentle smile, and he'd already begun implementing new organic growing methods in the eastern fields as part of his senior project. The Harrison property wasn't just a farm. It was the unofficial heart of northern Riverview County. The community cider press helped neighboring farms process their harvests. The big barn hosted weddings, reunions, and the annual county winter dance. During the drought 3 years ago, Sam had opened his irrigation pond to help neighbors water their livestock. The Harrisons have always understood that land is a trust, not a possession, Reverend Thomas had said in Katherine's eulogy 5 years earlier. They hold it for future generations and for the community that depends on it. The first signs of trouble came subtly in early spring, just as the apple blossoms were beginning to show. County regulations about water usage mysteriously changed, restricting Sam's access to the creek that had watered Harrison land for a century. Property tax assessments suddenly doubled on the western parcel, with no explanation from the assessor's office. The small road maintenance subsidy the county had always provided for the Harrison access road was abruptly cancelled. Sam started noticing unfamiliar vehicles parked along his perimeter, taking photographs and making notes, men in suits walking his boundary lines with GPS equipment. A drone hovering over his main fields that scattered his honeybees and disappeared. When he tried to confront the operator, when he finally caught up with one such visitor, a clean-cut young man in pressed khakis taking soil samples near the creek, the man simply smiled and handed him a business card. Westridge Enterprises, developing tomorrow's communities today. You're trespassing, Sam said firmly, returning the card. This is private property. For now, the man replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You might want to check with the county about that easement issue. He gestured toward the creek. Water rights are getting complicated these days. Sam felt the first chill of real concern as he watched the man drive away in a gleaming SUV. That night, he pulled out the old deed box Katherine had always kept organized, spreading the yellowing papers across the kitchen table his grandfather had built from orchard wood a century ago. Something was happening, and Sam Harrison had the uneasy feeling that his family's legacy was facing a threat more serious than spring frost or summer drought. This was a different kind of storm gathering, and he wasn't sure if his weathered hands were strong enough to protect what 5 generations had built. What Sam couldn't know then was how quickly that storm would arrive, or the unexpected allies who would appear to help him weather it. A week after finding the soil sampling trespasser, Sam received a certified letter from the county clerk's office. The envelope trembled slightly in his hands as he opened it at his kitchen table, the morning light streaming through windows that had witnessed a century of Harrison family breakfasts. Notice of eminent domain proceedings. The heading read, in bold, official font. Sam's reading glasses slid down his nose as he absorbed the bureaucratic language that somehow managed to sound both impersonal and threatening at the same time. The letter explained that Riverview County had entered into a public-private partnership with Westridge Enterprises for a tourism and economic development initiative. The Harrison property had been designated as a key acquisition zone for the Riverview Resort and Recreation Complex, a project that would purportedly bring substantial economic benefits to the region. Sam read the letter 3 times, his coffee growing cold beside him before the full reality sank in. They were trying to take his land, not buy it, take it. This can't be legal, he muttered to himself, reaching for the phone to call Mark at the university. His son answered on the second ring. Dad? Everything okay? You never call this early? The county's trying to take the orchard, Sam said, his voice steadier than he felt. Something called eminent domain, for some resort. Mark's sharp intake of breath carried through the line. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to anyone. I'm calling Professor Abernathy from my law seminar right now, and I'm coming home this weekend. After hanging up, Sam drove into town, the letter tucked into his shirt pocket like a ticking bomb. The county administrative building sat in the center of Riverdale, the county seat, a blocky concrete structure from the 1970s that had always seemed too large and imposing for the small town around it. Inside, Sam navigated the fluorescent-lit hallways to the county commissioner's office, where he was informed by a receptionist that Commissioner Phillips was in meetings all day. When Sam insisted on waiting, the young woman gave him a sympathetic look. "You're the Harrison orchard, right?" she asked in a lowered voice, glancing toward the closed office door. "You might want to try talking to Diane in the records office. She might have some information for you." The records office was in the basement, a windowless room lined with filing cabinets and smelling of old paper. Diane, a silver-haired woman who had worked for the county longer than anyone could remember, recognized Sam immediately. "I was wondering when you'd come in," she said, closing the door behind him. "This whole thing stinks to high heaven, Sam." For the next hour, Diane showed him public records that painted a disturbing picture. 3 months earlier, the county had quietly rezoned a large section of northern Riverview County, including his property, from agricultural to mixed-use commercial. The public notice had been printed in tiny font on page 38 of the county newspaper, technically legal, but practically invisible. The commissioners' meeting where the vote took place had been rescheduled at the last minute from evening to 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, when most working residents couldn't attend. "There's more," Diane said, pulling up a property records database on her ancient computer. "Westridge has been buying up land all around yours through shell companies. Different names, but if you follow the paperwork, it all leads back to them." Sam stared at the screen, seeing familiar names of neighbors who had sold over the past year. Old Man Jenkins' place, the Peterson farm that had gone into foreclosure after his stroke. Even Elijah had sold his southern parcel, though he hadn't mentioned it during their Sunday coffees. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Sam asked. "Confidentiality agreements," Diane replied grimly. "Every sale has one, and there's this." She handed him a glossy brochure that showed renderings of a massive resort complex centered exactly where his orchard stood. "The Westridge Riverview Resort," the brochure proclaimed, "coming 2026. "This is dated 6 months ago," Sam said, his voice hollow as he stared at the image of luxury cabins scattered across hills that looked suspiciously like his. A golf course covered the western fields. A spa complex sat where his barn had stood for over a century. "They've been planning this." For years," Diane confirmed. "The way I figure it, they bought everything they could, then got the commissioners to use eminent domain for the holdouts." "Is there anything I can do?" Sam asked. Diane sighed. "The law says they have to pay fair market value, but they get to decide what fair means. And with the rezoning, they're valuing it as raw land, not as a productive orchard." Sam thanked her and drove home in a daze, the brochure burning a hole in his glove compartment. When he arrived back at the orchard, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade was parked in his driveway. A woman in an impeccable grey suit stood on his porch, her stiletto heels looking absurdly out of place on the worn wooden boards where generations of Harrisons had sat watching sunsets. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore sunglasses despite the cloudy day. "Mr. Harrison," she said with a practiced smile as he approached. "I'm Victoria Chambers, Senior Acquisition Manager for Westridge Enterprises. I was hoping we might have a chat about your property." Sam stood at the bottom of his porch steps, deliberately not inviting her inside the home his family had built. "Not much to chat about. My land isn't for sale." Victoria's smile didn't falter. "I understand your attachment, Mr. Harrison. Family legacy, generations of memories. We see this often in our line of work. That's why I'm authorized to offer you a premium above the county's assessment." She opened a leather portfolio and extended a document. "This is 30% above what the county would pay under eminent domain proceedings." Sam didn't take the paper. "Ms. Chambers, I'm not interested in selling. Not for 30% more, not for 300% more." For the first time, Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "Mr. Harrison, perhaps you don't understand the situation. The development is moving forward. The county has already approved the resort plan. This is simply a courtesy offer to make the transition smoother for everyone involved." Courtesy. Sam felt his temper rising. "You're trying to steal land, my family has worked for 100 years, and you call that courtesy?" Victoria removed her sunglasses, revealing cool blue eyes. "Mr. Harrison, let me be frank. Westridge Enterprises has invested over $40 million in this project already. We have commitments from major hotel chains, golf course designers, and retail partners. We have the full support of the county commissioners and the state. Tourism board. She stepped closer, her voice lowering. Fighting this will only cost you money you don't have, and time you could be spending finding a new property. Our lawyers will tie you up in court until your resources are exhausted. And, in the end, the result will be the same, except you'll settle for the county's assessment instead of our premium offer. Sam's hands clenched at his sides. My grandfather faced down the bank during the Depression. My father rebuilt after the flood of '62 took half our trees. We Harrisons don't scare easy, Miss Chambers. Victoria replaced her sunglasses and closed, her portfolio with a snap. Admirable, but ultimately irrelevant. You have 3 days to accept our offer before we proceed with the county's eminent domain process. She handed him a manila envelope. All the paperwork is in here. I suggest you review it with whatever passes for legal counsel in these parts. As she walked to her Escalade, she turned back. Oh, and Mr. Harrison, I'd recommend not trying to. Harvest this year's crop. It would be a shame to waste the labor on fruit you won't be here to sell. After she drove away, Sam opened the envelope with shaking hands. The offer was substantial in raw numbers, more money than he'd ever seen, but nowhere near the true value of a productive orchard with established trees and organic certification. And no amount of money could replace what the land meant to his family. That evening, Sam called a meeting of the few neighboring farmers who hadn't sold out. They gathered around his kitchen table. Horace Washington, whose family had farmed the valley since Reconstruction, Maria Vasquez, whose organic vegetable operation supplied restaurants across 3 counties, and Peter Running Bear, whose family's land had been returned to the tribe after decades of legal battles. They're coming for all of us, Horace said gravely, after Sam explained the situation. My place is scheduled for acquisition next month, Maria nodded. They offered me a partnership that would let me keep a small demonstration garden for the tourists, called it authentic local color. Peter's expression was the grimmest of all. My tribe's attorneys say the county's use of eminent domain is technically legal if they can prove economic benefit to the region. Westridge has commissioned studies showing thousands of jobs and millions in tax revenue. So we just give up? Sam asked, looking at the faces of his friends. Let them erase our family's legacies for golf courses and spas. Not giving up, Peter said quietly. But we need to be strategic. My cousin works for a non-profit legal foundation that specializes in land rights. I've already called him. Maria pulled out her laptop. And I've been documenting everything, the suspicious rezoning, the lack of proper notification, the environmental impact this resort would have on the watershed. Horace placed a gnarled hand on Sam's shoulder. We stand together like our families always have. As his friends left, each promising to leverage whatever connections and resources they had, Sam felt marginally better. But as he stood on his porch watching the sunset paint his orchard in gold, he couldn't shake Victoria Chambers' confident certainty. Westridge had money, political connections, and an army of lawyers. All Sam had was his deed, his friends, and the stubborn Harrison determination. What he didn't know was that the battle for Harrison Orchard was about to attract attention from quarters that neither he nor Westridge Enterprises could have anticipated. The morning after Victoria Chambers' visit, Sam rose before dawn, as he had done every day for decades. But today, instead of immediately heading to the orchard, he climbed the narrow stairs to the attic of the farmhouse. The wooden steps creaked under his weight, each groan familiar as an old friend's voice. The attic air was thick with dust and memory. Shafts of early morning light filtered through the small round window, illuminating dancing motes that swirled as Sam moved carefully between trunks, boxes and furniture that had witnessed the passage of generations. In the far corner, Beneath a faded quilt his grandmother had made sat an old steamer trunk with brass fittings gone green with age. Sam knelt before it, ignoring the protest of his knees, and lifted the heavy lid. The scent that escaped was the perfume of history, old paper, leather, and the indefinable fragrance of time itself. Inside lay the archives of Harrison Orchard. Not the legal documents, those were in the fireproof safe in his office downstairs, but the human record, the soul of the place. Sam lifted out his great-grandfather's journal, its leather cover worn smooth by hands long turned to dust. Opening to the first page, he read the faded but still legible handwriting. April 12th, 1920. Today I planted the first trees on what will become Harrison Orchard. The land speaks to me as none other has. He turned the brittle pages carefully, reading passages at random. November 1923. First harvest complete. Small, but the quality is exceptional. The Red Delicious and Northern Spy are particularly fine. This soil was meant for apples. July 1928. Margaret gave birth to our son James today, right here in the front bedroom. Dr. Wilkins says mother and child are doing well. I held my boy up to the window to show him his inheritance. The trees already growing strong on the hillside. Sam set the journal aside and reached deeper into the trunk, retrieving a manila envelope containing newspaper clippings yellowed with age. The first showed his grandfather standing proudly beside an early display of Harrison apples at the county fair, dated 1947. Another from 1962 showed his father surveying damage after the Great Flood, determination etched on his face despite the devastation around him. Harrison Orchard will rebuild, the headline promised. Next came photographs. His parents' wedding under the big oak tree that still stood by the creek. Sam himself as a toddler, sitting in an apple crate while his father worked nearby. Katherine, young and beautiful, laughing as she balanced on a ladder during their first harvest together. One by one, Sam laid out these fragments of his family's story across the attic floor, creating a mosaic of the Harrison legacy. Here was the first blue ribbon they'd won for cider. There was the architectural sketch his father had drawn for the barn renovation in 1973. Letters from customers spanning decades, thanking them for fruit that had graced holiday tables and marked special occasions. Sam found the birth announcements for both his children. Mark's tiny footprint on a hospital card, Leanne's crayon drawing of the orchard, labeled in a child's careful printing. My family's special place. Deeper in the trunk, he found his grandfather's army discharge papers from World War I and a carefully folded American flag. Beneath these was a fragile document that made Sam's breath catch. The original deed to the property, signed in 1920, the ink faded but still readable. His great-grandfather had purchased the land after returning from the same war, using every penny of his savings and taking on debt it took a decade to repay. A place to put down roots, the accompanying letter to his wife explained. A legacy for our children's children. As the sun rose higher, casting longer beams through the attic window, Sam continued his archaeological expedition through his family's past. He found Katherine's recipe book, filled with her handwritten notes for preserves, pies, and the award-winning cider that had become the orchard's signature product. Tucked inside the recipe book was a pressed apple blossom and a note in Katherine's elegant handwriting. From the first tree Sam and I planted together, spring 1985. The year after they were married. That tree still stood in what they had always called the Sweetheart Row, the first line of trees visible from their bedroom window. Sam sat back on his heels, surrounding himself with the accumulated evidence of a family's love affair with a piece of land. 5 generations had poured their hopes, dreams, sweat and tears into these acres. The Harrison story was written not just in journals and photographs, but in the very soil outside, in the trees that had been planted, tended and harvested by hands connected by blood and purpose. How could he put a price on this? How could Victoria, Chambers, or the county commissioners or anyone understand what this land truly meant? The sound of tires on gravel broke his reverie. Carefully returning the precious artifacts to the trunk, Sam made his way downstairs to find Mark's battered Honda parked beside his truck. His son was already out of the car, staring at the orchard with a pained expression that made him look older than his 22 years. "I thought you weren't coming until the weekend," Sam said as he stepped onto the porch. Mark turned, his face a younger echo of Sam's own, the same stubborn jaw, the same deep-set eyes that Katherine had always said could see into a person's heart. But where Sam's hair had gone silver, Mark's was still the rich brown of fresh-turned earth after rain. "Professor Abernathy said this couldn't wait," Mark replied, striding forward to embrace his father. "She's driving up tomorrow, but wanted me to bring some information right away." Inside the kitchen, Mark spread out legal papers across the same table where Victoria Chambers' offer still sat unopened. "The eminent domain claim has serious vulnerabilities," he explained, pointing to sections he'd highlighted. "The county has to prove this project benefits the public, not just private developers, and their notification process was legally questionable at best." Sam listened as his son outlined possible legal strategies, his heart swelling with a complex mixture of pride and sorrow. Mark should be focused on his final semester, on his future, not fighting desperate legal battles against corporate attorneys who probably billed more per hour than the orchard made in a day. "There's something else," Mark said, his expression growing more serious. "I talked to Leanne this morning. She's taking emergency leave from her job. She'll be here tomorrow." Sam's daughter Leanne was a software engineer in Seattle, her life as far removed from the orchard as seemed possible. While Mark had always been drawn to the land, Leanne had been eager to escape, to build a life beyond the confines of Riverview County. That she would drop everything to return now spoke volumes about the gravity of the situation. "I didn't want to worry her," Sam protested. Mark's expression was gentle but firm. "Dad, this isn't just your fight. The orchard belongs to all of us." That afternoon, father and son walked the property together, checking trees that were just beginning to show the promise of the coming season's fruit. Sam found himself pointing out details he'd never thought to mention before. Which trees produced the sweetest apples, which sections drained poorly in heavy rain, the subtle differences in soil across the rolling acres. "I always thought there'd be time to teach you everything gradually," Sam said, as they paused by Katherine's rose garden. "I figured we had years ahead of us to work side by side." Mark knelt to examine a rosebush just beginning to bud. "Mom planted these, right, the spring before she got sick?" Sam nodded, the memory still tender despite the passage of years. "She said every farm needed something that existed just for beauty, not for profit." "I remember helping her," Mark said softly. "She let me choose where each bush would go, said I had a good eye for design." They continued their circuit of the property, each step bringing fresh memories. The pond where Mark had learned to swim, the old lightning-struck oak they'd cut down together when Mark was 14, his first lesson in using the chainsaw, the experimental plot where they'd tried growing pear trees. A failed experiment, the soil wasn't right. When they reached the western boundary, they could see survey stakes topped with bright orange plastic, Westridge's markers claiming territory, like flags on a conquered land. "They act like it's already theirs," Mark said, anger coloring his voice. Sam gazed across his land, trying to see it as the developers did, not as a living ecosystem of trees and soil and generations of care, but as square footage and potential. Profits. as a blank canvas for luxury cabins and artificial landscaping. The very thought made something twist painfully in his chest. Your great-great-grandfather chose this spot because of the way the hills cradle the orchard, protecting it from the worst of the wind, Sam explained. He studied the soil, the water table, the angle of the sun throughout the seasons. He wasn't just buying land. He was finding the perfect partner for the trees he wanted to grow. Mark nodded. I remember you telling me that the best farmers don't impose their will on the land. They listen to what the land wants to be. That's right, Sam said, surprised and pleased that his son had retained the lesson. This land wanted to be an orchard. These hills were meant to grow apples. As sunset approached, they made their way back to the house. The golden hour light transformed the orchard, setting each tree in relief against lengthening shadows, a reminder of why photographers had sought permission to capture the Harrison orchard in this magical time of day. Sam paused at the edge of the property, where the gravel drive met the county road. From this vantage point, he could see almost the entire orchard, the neat rows of trees, the barn with its weathered red paint, the farmhouse with smoke now curling from the chimney where Mark had started a fire against the evening chill. We're not going to let them take it, Mark said, his voice steady with determination that reminded Sam of Katherine whenever she'd set her mind to something. Sam wished he could share his son's confidence, but Victoria Chambers' words kept echoing in his mind. Our lawyers will tie you up in court until your resources are exhausted. What Sam Harrison couldn't know, as he stood with his son watching the sun set on what might be one of their final days at the orchard, was that forces were already in motion that would change the course of the battle in ways neither the Harrisons nor Westridge Enterprises could have anticipated. The next morning brought rain, a gentle, misty drizzle that beaded on the apple blossoms and soaked into the thirsty spring soil. Sam stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the weather work its quiet magic on his land. In the orchard, each droplet caught the early light, transforming ordinary trees into constellations of liquid diamonds. Good for the new. Grafts, he murmured to himself. Last autumn, he and Mark had begun the painstaking process of introducing a rare heritage variety, Harrison Ruby, that Sam's grandfather had developed, but that had nearly been lost over the decades. Only 3 of the original trees remained, and they'd spent weeks carefully grafting cuttings onto younger rootstock. If Westridge had their way, those grafts would never bear fruit. The trees would be bulldozed before they had a chance to fulfill their potential. The thought had barely formed when Sam noticed something odd at the far edge of the property. Through the rain-streaked window, he could make out vehicles moving along the county road, not passenger cars, but heavy equipment. The rumble of diesel engines carried across the wet morning air. Mark appeared beside him, hair tousled from sleep. "What's going on?" "Don't know," Sam replied, setting down his coffee, "but I don't like it." Father and son pulled on rain gear and boots, then drove Sam's truck down the long gravel drive to the property boundary. What they found sent a chill through Sam that had nothing to do with the damp morning air. 3 large bulldozers and an excavator were parked along the county road, their massive yellow forms incongruous against the pastoral backdrop of the orchard. A white pickup truck with the Westridge Enterprises logo on its door was parked nearby, and a man in a hard hat stood consulting what appeared to be blueprints spread across the hood. Sam pulled his truck to the side of the road and approached, Mark close behind him. "What's the meaning of this?" Sam demanded, gesturing toward the equipment. "You have no right to bring these machines here." The man looked up, unsurprised by their arrival. He wore a fluorescent safety vest over a buttoned shirt and tie. Clearly a manager, not an operator. "Mr. Harrison, I presume," he said coolly. "I'm Clayton Weber, Site Development Manager for Westridge. We're just positioning equipment for preliminary work." "Preliminary work?" Mark echoed. "On property you don't own?" Webber smiled thinly. "We're not on your property, Mr. Harrison. We're on the county right-of-way." He pointed to a line of markers, set back from the road. "Everything from those stakes to the pavement is public land, according to the survey." Sam's jaw tightened. "You know damn well what you're doing. You're trying to intimidate us." "Not at all," Webber replied, his voice neutral. "We're simply preparing for an efficient transition once the acquisition is complete. Ms. Chambers informed me that you have until tomorrow to accept the company's generous offer." Mark stepped forward, his expression thunderous, but Sam placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. "This isn't over," Sam said to Webber, "not by a long shot." As they turned to leave, Weber called after them. "One more thing, Mr. Harrison. The County Road Department will be conducting infrastructure assessment along your driveway entrance today. Standard procedure for the upcoming improvements." "What improvements?" Sam asked. Weber's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The access road for the resort will require significant widening. Your current driveway will need to be reconfigured." Back in the truck, Mark slammed his fist against the dashboard. "They can't do this." "Apparently they can," Sam replied grimly, watching in the rearview mirror as Weber returned to his blueprints. At least on the county right-of-way, they had barely returned to the house when 3 county vehicles pulled up. A backhoe, a truck filled with equipment, and a supervisor's SUV. Without so much as a courtesy notification, the workers began digging up the culvert where Sam's driveway met the county road. By mid-morning, the entrance to Harrison Orchard was a muddy pit, technically still passable, but sending a clear message about Westridge's influence over county operations. As Sam watched from the porch, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Harrison, this is Sandra Abernathy, Professor of Environmental Law at State University. Your son Mark is one of my students. I understand you're facing some challenges." Sam explained the situation while keeping an eye on the county workers tearing up. "His driveway entrance, typical strong-arm tactics," Professor Abernathy said, her tone suggesting she'd seen this playbook before. "They want to make life difficult enough that selling seems like the path of least resistance." "It's working," Sam admitted. "They've got bulldozers lined up like they're preparing for an invasion." "I'll be there by early afternoon," the professor said. "In the meantime, document everything. Photos, videos, notes of every conversation. And whatever you do, don't sign anything." Shortly after noon, another unwelcome visitor arrived. A county health department vehicle pulled up, navigating carefully around the torn-up driveway entrance. A young official in a crisp uniform approached, the house carrying a clipboard and an air of bureaucratic authority. "Mr. Harrison, I'm from the county health department. We've received a complaint about possible contamination of the water supply on this property." Sam stared at him in disbelief. "Contamination? We're a certified organic operation. We haven't used chemical pesticides in over 20 years. The inspector seemed uncomfortable, but pressed on. "Nevertheless, we're required to investigate all complaints. I'll need access to your wells, irrigation system, and any water storage facilities." For the next 2 hours, the inspector methodically examined every aspect of the orchard's water system, taking samples and photographs while Sam followed, growing increasingly frustrated by the transparent harassment. When the inspection was finally complete, the young man avoided Sam's eyes. "You'll receive the results in 10 to 14 business days," he said, climbing back into his vehicle. "In the meantime, we're issuing a precautionary advisory against using water from your wells for any food production purposes." "What?" Sam exploded. "That's the only water source for the entire orchard." The inspector handed him an official-looking document. "I'm just following protocols, Mr. Harrison. You can file an appeal, of course. The process typically takes 30 to 60 days. As the health department vehicle pulled away, Mark emerged from the barn where he'd been cataloguing equipment for potential legal filings. "What was that about?" he asked, noting his father's stormy expression. Sam handed him the paper. "They're trying to shut down our water. Someone filed a bogus contamination complaint." Mark scanned the document, his expression darkening. "This is insane. Without irrigation, we'll lose half the orchard in a dry spell." "Exactly," Sam said grimly. "They know exactly what they're doing." The situation deteriorated further when Leanne arrived mid-afternoon, her rental car barely making it through the damaged driveway entrance. Sam's daughter had always been the spitting image of Katherine, the same auburn hair, the same determined, set to her jaw when she was angry. And right now, Leanne Harrison was furious. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, gesturing toward the county workers still digging up the culvert. "I had to park practically in the ditch." Inside, as Mark made coffee, Leanne examined the health department notice and Victoria Chambers' offer. Her analytical mind, the same intelligence that had made her a rising star in the tech industry, rapidly assessed the situation. "This is a coordinated pressure campaign," she concluded. "The bulldozers, the driveway, the water inspection. They're coming at you from all sides, hoping you'll break." "We know that," Mark said, setting mugs on the table. "The question is, what can we do about it?" The arrival of Professor Abernathy provided some answers. A formidable woman in her 60s with silver hair cut in a no-nonsense bob, she carried herself with the confidence of someone used to winning battles in and out of the courtroom. "First things first," she said after introductions were made. "We need emergency injunctions on several fronts." She pulled out her laptop and began typing rapidly. "The water advisory is particularly vulnerable. They've provided no evidence of contamination, and the timing is suspiciously convenient." For the next few hours, the kitchen table became a war room as Professor Abernathy drafted legal documents, while Leanne researched Westridge Enterprises on her laptop, looking for vulnerabilities in their corporate structure. "They've done this before," Leanne announced, looking up from her screen. 3 similar projects in the past 5 years, one in Michigan, one in Oregon, and one in Colorado. Same playbook each time. Buy surrounding properties, get local officials on board, then use eminent domain on holdouts. "Did anyone successfully fight them off?" Mark asked. Leanne's expression was grim. "Not that I can find. They're batting 1,000. As evening approached, Sam stepped outside to check on the orchard workers who had continued their spring pruning despite the day's chaos. The county crew had finally departed, leaving behind a hastily filled-in trench that turned the driveway entrance into a muddy obstacle course. From where he stood, Sam could see the bulldozers still parked along the road, their presence a looming threat in the fading light. Beyond them, his orchard stretched across the rolling hills, the trees now decades old but still decades away from the end of their productive lives, if they were allowed to survive. The sound of another vehicle approaching drew his attention. A black SUV was making its careful way through the damaged entrance. For a moment, Sam thought Victoria Chambers had returned, but as the vehicle drew closer, he recognized the county sheriff's insignia on the door. Sheriff Ray Daniels was a third-generation law enforcement officer whose family had been in Riverview County as long as the Harrisons. He and Sam had gone to school together, played on the same baseball team, even dated the same girl briefly before Sam met Katherine. But as Ray stepped out of his SUV, his expression was official, not friendly. "Sam," he said with a curt nod, "got some papers to serve you." "You too, Ray," Sam said, disappointment heavy in his voice. "Thought you of all people would see through this Westridge business." The sheriff's eyes flicked toward the house, then back to Sam. "Just doing my job," he said quietly, handing over a thick envelope. "County Circuit Court, you've been named in a lawsuit for interference with lawful county operations." "What?" Sam stared at the envelope, then back at his old friend. "That's absurd. What operations?" "What?" Sam stared at the envelope, then back at his old friend. "That's absurd. What operations?" "The infrastructure assessment your son disrupted this morning," Ray replied. The crew foreman says he physically blocked the backhoe and made threatening statements. That's a damn lie, and you know it, Sam snapped. Mark just asked questions about what they were doing. Sheriff Daniels sighed, his official demeanor slipping slightly. Sam, you didn't hear this from me, but there's a commission meeting tonight. A closed session. Word is they're voting to accelerate the eminent domain proceedings. They can't do that, Sam protested. There are procedures, timelines. Emergency public safety exception, Ray cut in. They're claiming the health department. Findings indicate an urgent need to secure the watershed. He glanced over his shoulder, as if checking that they weren't being observed. Look, I've got to go, but Sam, be careful. There's a lot of money pushing this project forward. As the sheriff drove away, Sam stood holding the lawsuit papers, feeling the weight of the day's events pressing down on him. In less than 12 hours, Westridge had positioned heavy equipment on his boundary, damaged his driveway, threatened his water supply, and now served him with a frivolous lawsuit clearly designed to drain his limited resources. Inside, he found Professor Abernathy, Mark and Leanne still working at the kitchen table. Wordlessly, he handed the lawsuit papers to the professor, who scanned them with a deepening frown. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore, she said, setting down the documents. This is harassment, plain and simple. Can we fight it? Sam asked. Of course, Professor Abernathy replied. But that's exactly what they want, to keep you so busy fighting on multiple fronts that you exhaust your resources and resolve. Mark slammed his hand on the table. So we just give up. Let them steamroll us. Professor Abernathy's expression softened. I didn't say that, but we need to be strategic, not reactive. They want you emotional and off balance. Leanne, who had been quietly typing on her laptop, looked up suddenly. I think I found something, she said. Westridge's environmental impact statement for the resort project. They submitted it to the state 3 months ago. So, Mark asked. So, Leanne continued, her eyes bright with discovery. It includes detailed plans for Harrison Orchard, hydrological surveys, soil samples, tree inventories, data they couldn't possibly have gathered legally. Professor Abernathy leaned forward, suddenly alert. Are you saying they trespassed to collect that data? Not just trespassed, Leanne replied. This is systematic, long-term surveillance, and they submitted it in official documents under penalty of perjury. For the first time that day, Sam felt a flicker of hope. But as he looked out the window at the gathering darkness, he could still make out the silhouettes of the bulldozers, waiting at the edge of his property, harbingers of the destruction Westridge had planned for the orchard his family had tended for generations. Whatever advantage Leanne had discovered, Sam knew that time was running out. Victoria Chambers' deadline would expire tomorrow, and Westridge Enterprises had made it abundantly clear they would stop at nothing to take what they wanted. Dawn broke clear and cold over Harrison Orchard, the spring sun burning away the previous day's rain clouds. Sam had been awake for hours, sleep having abandoned him sometime in the dark watches of the night. He sat at the kitchen table, nursing his third cup of coffee and watching the light creep across his land, painting the apple trees in gold and shadow. Professor Abernathy had returned to her hotel in Riverdale after midnight, armed with the evidence Leanne had discovered and promising to file emergency motions with the circuit court first thing in the morning. Leanne and Mark had finally collapsed into exhausted sleep around 2 a.m., after hours of compiling documentation and preparing for the legal battles ahead. But Sam couldn't rest. Victoria Chambers' deadline loomed like a storm front on the horizon. And despite their small breakthrough, the odds remained staggeringly against them. Westridge had money, political connections, and a ruthlessness that had bulldozed all previous opposition. The thought of bulldozers turned Sam's gaze to the county road where the heavy equipment remained parked in silent threat. He sighed, draining the last of his coffee, and made a decision. He couldn't control what Westridge or the county did, but he could control what happened on his orchard today. Moving quietly to avoid waking Mark and Leanne, Sam gathered his work. Gear, gloves, pruning shears, grafting tape, and left a note on the counter. In the north section. Back for lunch. Outside, the morning air was knife-edge sharp, carrying the scent of wet earth and apple blossoms. Sam breathed deeply, feeling some of the tension ease from his shoulders as he walked the familiar path through the heart of the orchard. Whatever happened with Westridge, these trees deserved his care today. The north section contained the oldest trees on the property, some planted by Sam's grandfather in the 1940s. Though less productive than the younger sections, these venerable giants produced apples with a complexity of flavor that the newer varieties couldn't match. Sam had been gradually rejuvenating them through careful pruning and selective grafting, a decades-long project that would now likely end prematurely. For the next few hours, Sam lost himself in the rhythm of the work, checking grafts from the previous season, removing damaged branches, clearing space for healthy growth. The physical labor was meditative, allowing his mind to quiet even as his body tired in the satisfying way that came from meaningful work. As the sun climbed higher, Sam became aware of a vehicle approaching on the county road. Not a bulldozer or county truck this time, but an older model sedan that pulled off onto the shoulder near the Harrison property boundary. A man in his 70s emerged, moving carefully but deliberately toward the orchard fence line. Sam recognized him immediately. Walter Green, a retired Army colonel who had purchased a small hobby farm on the outskirts of Riverdale after his military career. They knew each other casually from the farmer's market where Sam sold his apples, and Walter, his honey. They'd exchanged pleasantries and occasionally advice on bee-friendly farming practices, but weren't what Sam would consider close friends. "Walter," Sam called, setting down his pruning shears and walking to meet the older man at the fence. "What brings you out this way?" Walter's weathered face was solemn beneath his battered fishing hat. "Heard about your trouble with Westridge, Sam. Whole town's talking about it." Sam nodded, unsurprised. In small communities, news, especially bad news, traveled with remarkable efficiency. "Not much to say that you haven't already heard. I expect they want my land, and they've got the county in their pocket." Walter's eyes, sharp despite his age, surveyed the bulldozers parked down the road. "Saw those on my way in. Not subtle, are they?" "No," Sam agreed. "Subtlety isn't in their playbook." Walter was silent for a moment, his gaze now taking in the orchard, the ancient trees, the neat rows stretching across the hillside, the farmhouse in the distance. "My Elaine always loved your honey-crisp apples," he said finally. "Wouldn't make her pie with anything else." Sam remembered Walter's wife, a kind-faced woman who had succumbed to cancer a few years earlier. "She had good taste," he said simply. "Yes, she did." Walter's voice softened with memory before returning to the present. "Sam, I came to tell you something. I know people who might be able to help with your situation." Sam raised an eyebrow, skeptical but willing to listen. "Professor Abernathy from the university is already helping us with the legal angle." Walter shook his head. "Not talking about lawyers. I'm talking about some folks I served with. Men who understand what it means to fight for something worth protecting." Before Sam could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. A sleek black Lexus was making its way up the damaged driveway, navigating the muddy ruts with visible difficulty. Even at a distance, Sam recognized Victoria Chambers behind the wheel. "That'll be Westridge, coming to collect their pound of flesh," Sam said grimly. "I should head back to the house." Walter nodded. "You go on." "But Sam, I meant what I said. You're not alone in this fight." He pressed something into Sam's hand, a business card with only a phone number printed on it, no name or company. "Call this number tonight, around 9. Just identify yourself. Nothing more. They'll know what it's about. Sam pocketed the card, puzzled but grateful for the unexpected support. I appreciate it, Walter, whatever comes of it. As Walter returned to his car, Sam made his way back to the farmhouse, arriving just as Victoria Chambers was stepping out of her Lexus, her expression sour as she surveyed the mud now splattered on her vehicle's gleaming paint. "Your driveway is a disaster, Mr. Harrison," she said by way of greeting. "Courtesy of your friends at the County Road Department," Sam replied evenly. "I'd apologize, but we both know who's responsible." Victoria's professionally pleasant mask slipped for a moment, revealing the steel beneath. "Is that accusation really how you want to start our final conversation?" Mark appeared on the porch, alerted by the sound of voices. "Dad, everything okay? Ms. Chambers from Westridge is here," Sam called back, "just reminding us of today's deadline." "Actually," Victoria cut in, "I'm here with an update to our offer." She retrieved a folder from her car. "In light of some community concerns, Westridge is prepared to increase our compensation package by 15%, with an additional provision." Sam crossed his arms. "What provision?" "A portion of the orchard, 5 acres around the original homestead trees, would be preserved as a heritage garden within the resort complex. Visitors could learn about the Harrison family's contribution to the region's agricultural history." Sam stared at her, incredulous. "You want to turn my family's legacy into a tourist attraction? A quaint little exhibit people can wander through between spa treatments?" Victoria's smile didn't waver. "We're trying to find a compromise that honors the past while embracing the future. The alternative remains as discussed. Standard eminent domain proceedings with basic compensation." By now, Leanne had joined Mark on the porch, both watching the exchange with tense expressions. Sam felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of 5 generations of Harrisons who had worked this land, felt the pressure of Westridge's deadline bearing down. In that moment, Sam thought of Walter Green, a man he barely knew, driving out to offer support. He thought of Professor Abernathy working through the night on their behalf. He thought of his neighbors, Horace, Maria, Peter, standing together despite overwhelming odds. "Ms. Chambers," Sam said finally, "I appreciate you coming all this way to deliver your updated offer, but my answer remains the same. Harrison Orchard is not for sale. Not at your original price, not at 15% more, not at any price." Victoria's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Mr. Harrison, I don't think you understand the reality of your situation. This is happening, whether you cooperate or not. The only question is whether you walk away with a generous settlement or fight a losing battle that leaves you with nothing." Sam met her gaze steadily. "The way I see it, Ms. Chambers, if I sell to you, I walk away with money but nothing else. If I fight, win or lose, I keep my self-respect and the knowledge that I stood up for what matters. Seems like an easy choice to me." For a brief moment, something like genuine emotion flickered across Victoria's face. Not anger, but something more complex. Perhaps even a reluctant respect, but it vanished quickly, replaced by cool professionalism. "I'll note your decision," she said, returning the folder to her car. "Westridge will proceed with the county's eminent domain process effective immediately. I suggest you prepare yourself for what comes next." As she carefully maneuvered her mud-spattered Lexus back down the rutted driveway, Mark and Leanne descended the porch steps to stand beside their father. "Did we just burn our last bridge?" Mark asked quietly. Sam watched the Lexus disappear around the bend. "Maybe, but it was a bridge to nowhere I wanted to go." Inside the house, they found Professor Abernathy had returned, her expression grimly triumphant. "I've filed for emergency injunctions on both the Health Department water advisory and the infrastructure work on your driveway," she announced, "and I've submitted a formal complaint regarding Westridge's unauthorized data collection on your property." "Will it be enough?" Leanne asked. The professor's hesitation told them everything they needed to know. "It buys us time," she said finally. "But Westridge has considerable influence with the judiciary. Judge Preston, who's likely to hear our motions, has historically favored development interests." The day passed in a blur of phone calls, document reviews, and strategy sessions. Peter Runningbear arrived with an attorney from the Indigenous Environmental Network who specialized in fighting corporate land grabs. Maria Vasquez brought lunch for everyone, and news that several regional environmental groups were organizing protests against the Westridge development. By late afternoon, Horace Washington appeared with 5 members of the County Historical Society, who began the process of documenting the orchard's features for an emergency application for historical landmark status. A long shot, but another potential delay. Tactic. Through it all, Sam found himself oddly calm. The decision to stand firm against Westridge had lifted a weight from his shoulders. Whatever happened now, he would face it knowing he had stayed true to his family's legacy and his own principles. As evening approached, the various allies and supporters departed, promising to return the next day. Professor Abernathy was the last to leave, pausing at the door to squeeze Sam's shoulder. "You showed remarkable courage today, Mr. Harrison. Not many people would stand up to a corporation of Westridge's size and influence." Sam shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what needs doing, same as my father would have done, and his father before him." After a simple dinner, Mark and Leanne insisted on cleaning up while Sam took some time to himself. He found himself drawn to the porch, where generations of Harrisons had sat, watching the sunset paint their orchard in gold and crimson. As darkness settled over the land, Sam remembered Walter Green's strange visit and the business card with its mysterious phone number. Pulling it from his pocket, he studied it in the porch light. Plain white cardstock, a single number printed in black, nothing more. At precisely 9 o'clock, Sam dialed the number, unsure what to expect. The call connected after a single ring. "Yes?" A man's voice, curt and professional. "This is Samuel Harrison," Sam said, feeling slightly foolish. "Walter Green gave me this number. Harrison Orchard, Riverview County." "Yes, that's right. Stand by." The line went silent for several seconds. Then, "Mr. Harrison, we're aware of your situation with Westridge Enterprises. We have reason to believe their activities in your region extend beyond aggressive business tactics into potentially illegal territory." Sam straightened in his chair. "Who is we?" "That's not important right now," the voice replied. "What matters is that we have mutual interests in documenting and potentially disrupting Westridge's operations. We're preparing to offer assistance, but we need your cooperation." "What kind of assistance?" Sam asked, caution warring with hope. "The kind that leaves no trace but changes everything," the voice answered cryptically. "A team will make contact. Tomorrow night. Be ready." The call disconnected before Sam could ask any more questions. Sam sat for a long time on the darkened porch, the silent phone in his hand, wondering what he had just set in motion. Walter Green was a retired Army colonel with a reputation for integrity. If he vouched for these people, they were likely legitimate. But what kind of help could they possibly offer against a corporate giant like Westridge? As if in answer to his unspoken question, Sam noticed movement at the edge of his property, the distant beams of flashlights moving among the parked construction equipment. Even at this distance, he could make out several figures examining the bulldozers under cover of darkness. County officials, Westridge security, protesters. Sam couldn't tell, but an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. Tomorrow would bring a new phase of this battle, and he had just aligned himself with unknown forces in his desperation to save his family's land. Inside the house, he found Mark and Leanne reviewing legal documents at the kitchen table, their young faces drawn with fatigued but determined. Looking at them, Sam felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. They had put their lives on hold to join this fight, not knowing if victory was even possible. "Everything okay, Dad?" Leanne asked, looking up from her laptop. Sam forced a reassuring smile. "Just checking the property before turning in. Big day tomorrow." What he didn't tell them was just how big that day might be, or about the mysterious call and the promised team that would make contact. Some burdens were his alone to carry, at least until he knew more about what Walter Green's connections had planned. As Sam climbed the stairs to his bedroom, exhaustion finally catching up with him, he couldn't know that the shadowy figures by the bulldozers were neither county officials nor Westridge security, but the advanced scouts of a group that specialized in evening, seemingly impossible odds. Nor could he know that in a hotel room 20 miles away, Victoria Chambers was receiving an encrypted message on a separate secure line. "Operation compromised. Tier 1 surveillance detected. Recommend immediate abort." The battle for Harrison Orchard was about to enter a phase that neither side had anticipated. The following morning arrived with an ominous development. Sam, rising before dawn as always, looked out his bedroom window to see not 3 bulldozers at the edge of his property, but a veritable fleet of construction equipment. In the pre-dawn gloom, he counted at least 8 heavy machines, including 2 massive excavators, lined up along the county road like an invasion force awaiting the order to advance. Worse still, a mobile office trailer had been set up overnight, with the Westridge logo prominently displayed on its side. Floodlights mounted on tall poles illuminated the area, creating a harsh bubble of artificial daylight that encroached on the natural darkness of the orchard. Several men in hard hats and safety vests moved purposefully around the equipment, conducting pre-operation inspections despite the early hour. The message was unmistakable. Westridge was done waiting. Sam dressed quickly and went downstairs to a fine Mark already at the kitchen window, surveying the same disturbing scene. "They're not wasting any time," Mark said, his voice tight with anger and worry. "Must have brought that equipment in during the night." To avoid protesters, Sam surmised, pouring himself coffee from the pot Mark had already brewed. They knew if they moved all that in during daylight, people would notice and might try to block it. Leanne joined them a few minutes later, taking in the situation with one glance out the window. Her expression hardened from sleep-rumpled to combat-ready in seconds. "I'm calling Professor Abernathy," she said, reaching for her phone. "This has to violate the emergency injunctions she filed yesterday. Won't matter if the judge hasn't ruled on them yet," Mark pointed out. "And even if he has, by the time we get enforcement out here..." He didn't need to finish the thought. They all knew how this worked now. Delay tactics from the authorities, swift action from Westridge, with the outcome being irreversible damage before any legal remedies could be applied. Sam's phone rang. Sheriff Daniels. "Sam," the sheriff said without preamble, "I'm on my way to your place with Judge Preston's ruling on the eminent domain acceleration. It's not good news." "He approved it," Sam said flatly. "Not a question." "Emergency public safety exemption," Ray confirmed, his voice weary. "Based on the health department's preliminary findings about water contamination, they're authorized to begin environmental remediation immediately." Remediation? Sam's grip tightened on the phone. "There's nothing to remediate. The water contamination claim is completely fabricated." "I know that," Ray said quietly. "But the paperwork says otherwise, and I'm obligated to serve the order. I'll be there in 20 minutes. After hanging up, Sam relayed the news to his children, watching their faces fall with the realization of what this meant. The county had just handed Westridge legal authority to enter the property immediately, not merely to survey or assess, but to begin active work. "Can they really do this?" Leanne asked, outrage coloring her voice. "Override due process based on fake health concerns?" They just did, Sam replied grimly. Mark paced the kitchen, frustration radiating from every movement. So what now? We stand in front of the bulldozers? Chain ourselves to the trees? Sam shook his head. We're not giving up, but we're not getting arrested either. That wouldn't help anything. He stepped onto the porch, needing fresh air and a moment to think. The morning was beautiful, despite the mechanical intrusion at the property's edge. A vivid sunrise painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose, wisps of ground fog drifting between the apple trees like lost spirits. The contrast between nature's tranquility and the looming industrial threat made his heart ache. By the time Sheriff Daniels arrived, Professor Abernathy had joined them, having driven straight from her hotel without stopping for breakfast. She scanned the court order with growing indignation. "This is a travesty," she declared, flipping through the pages. "Judge Preston issued this at 11 p.m. last night without notifying opposing counsel, us, or waiting for the results of our motions. It's a flagrant violation of procedural norms. Can we fight it?" Sam asked. The professor's expression was grave. "We can appeal, but the process takes time. Meanwhile, this order gives them immediate right of entry for emergency environmental remediation work." Sheriff Daniels stood uncomfortably by his vehicle, clearly unhappy with his role in the proceedings. "I'm sorry, Sam. If it means anything, half the department thinks this whole thing stinks to high heaven." "Then do something about it," Mark challenged, his young face flushed with anger. Ray shook his head. "Court orders aren't optional in my line of work, son. I enforce the law as written, not as I wish it was." As they spoke, a convoy of vehicles turned onto the county road, Westridge personnel carriers, followed by what appeared to be private security SUVs with tinted windows. Last in line was the now familiar Lexus driven by Victoria Chambers. The Westridge contingent parked behind the construction equipment, disgorging men and women in corporate attire mixed with construction management personnel. Victoria emerged from her vehicle and approached the Harrison property line, flanked by two burly men in tactical-style clothing bearing the logo of Summit Security Services. "Mr. Harrison," she called, her voice carrying across the dewy morning air. "I trust Sheriff Daniels has provided you with the court order. We'll be commencing preliminary environmental assessment work immediately." Professor Abernathy stepped forward. "Ms. Chambers, we are filing an emergency appeal on this ruling. I strongly advise you to delay any action until the appeals court has reviewed Judge Preston's highly irregular decision." Victoria's smile was cold. "You're welcome to pursue whatever legal avenues you deem appropriate, Professor. Meanwhile, we have a valid court order and a schedule to maintain." She turned to one of the security men. "Mr. Kowalski, please establish a safety perimeter. No unauthorized personnel beyond the property line." The security team began unspooling yellow caution tape along the boundary of Harrison Orchard, effectively creating a barrier between the family and the construction equipment. Victoria watched with satisfaction, then turned back to address Sam directly. "Mr. Harrison, I want to be clear. This court order grants us access to your property for environmental testing and remediation. We expect your full cooperation. Any interference will be considered contempt of court and dealt with accordingly." Sam felt a cold fury building inside him, but kept his voice steady. "That order was obtained through fraudulent claims about water contamination. You know it. I know it, and eventually the courts will know it too." Victoria's expression didn't change. "The health department's findings speak for themselves. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a project to oversee." As she walked away, Sam turned to Professor Abernathy. "How long will the appeal take?" "Best case, 24 hours for an emergency stay. Worst case, several days for a hearing." Mark looked toward the construction equipment, now roaring to life as operators climbed into cabs and began warming up engines. By then they could destroy half the orchard. The next few hours unfolded with nightmarish inevitability. Under the authority of Judge Preston's order, Westridge personnel entered Harrison property, initially confining themselves to taking soil samples and water readings near the creek. But by mid-morning, the first excavator rolled through the boundary, its massive treads crushing the young saplings Mark had planted the previous autumn. Sam, Mark, Leanne, and Professor Abernathy watched in helpless fury as a team of workers began marking trees with bright orange spray paint, X marks indicating removal targets. When Mark attempted to approach one of the marking teams, a security guard intercepted him, hand hovering near what appeared to be a taser on his belt. "Sir, please remain behind the designated safety line," the guard instructed, his voice professionally. Neutral, but his stance unmistakably threatening. "That's my family's orchard you're vandalizing," Mark shot back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Mark!" Sam called sharply. "Come back here, now!" The last thing they needed was an arrest for interfering with court-ordered work. Noon, the situation had drawn attention. News vans from local stations had arrived, parking along the county road to film the construction equipment now actively at work on Harrison land. Neighbors and townspeople began to gather as well, forming a small but vocal group of protesters near the property entrance. Maria Vasquez had organized fellow farmers who held signs reading "Save Harrison Orchard" and "Stop Corporate Land Theft." Horace Washington arrived with members of his church congregation who formed a prayer circle at the edge of the road. Peter Running Bear brought tribal elders who conducted a ceremony asking for protection of the land. The show of support was heartening but ultimately symbolic. The court order gave Westridge legal authority that no amount of public pressure could immediately overcome. By mid-afternoon, the first section of Harrison Orchard, a plot of young trees near the road, had been completely cleared, the uprooted saplings piled like casualties of war. Victoria Chambers oversaw the operation from a folding table set up near the mobile office, occasionally glancing toward the farmhouse where Sam and his children watched the destruction with stricken faces. Once, when their eyes met across the distance, Sam thought he detected a flicker of something like regret in her expression, quickly masked by professional detachment. Around 3 o'clock, a new complication arose. Clayton Weber, the site development manager, approached Victoria with a concerned expression, pointing to something on his tablet. After a brief, intense conversation, Victoria strode across the property toward the farmhouse, 2 security guards trailing in her wake. "Mr. Harrison," she called as she neared the porch where the family had gathered. "We've encountered an issue that requires your immediate attention." Sam descended the steps slowly, maintaining a deliberate distance between them. "What now?" "Our ground-penetrating radar has detected what appear to be unmarked graves on the western slope," Victoria stated, her tone businesslike. "Approximately 1 acre with multiple distinct anomalies consistent with burial sites." Sam nodded, unsurprised. "The Harrison family cemetery, established 1924. My great-grandparents, grandparents, and other family members are buried there." Victoria's expression tightened. "This wasn't disclosed in any of the property records." "It's in the original deed," Sam countered, "as a family burial ground in perpetuity. Check your paperwork. If you didn't know about it, you didn't do proper due diligence." Victoria consulted briefly with someone via her earpiece, then turned back to Sam. "We'll need to verify the status of this cemetery. In the meantime, we'll continue work in the eastern sections." As she walked away, Leanne moved to stand beside her father. "Does this help us?" she asked quietly. "Maybe," Sam replied. "Cemetery desecration laws are pretty strict, might slow them down, at least in that section, but any small victory was overshadowed by the continued destruction elsewhere on the property." By late afternoon, the excavators had cleared a wide swath through the younger sections of the orchard, creating what looked like a crude access road straight through the heart of the Harrison land. As the sun began its westward descent, casting Long shadows across the ravaged landscape, Sam felt a weight of despair, unlike anything he'd experienced since Katherine's death. Generations of careful cultivation were being systematically destroyed before his eyes, and all his resources, legal, financial, and emotional, seemed inadequate to stop it. Sheriff Daniels returned around 5 o'clock, his expression grave, as he surveyed the day's devastation. "Sam, I need to speak with you," he said, gesturing toward the privacy of the farmhouse porch. Once they were alone, Ray spoke in a low voice. "County Commissioner called an emergency session for tonight. Word is, they're voting on immediate possession of the entire property, not just access for testing, but full transfer of ownership, effective tomorrow morning." Sam stared at his old friend in disbelief. "They can't do that. There are procedures, timelines for eminent domain. We get at least 90 days to vacate after compensation is determined." "They're citing some obscure statute about critical public infrastructure needs," Ray replied. "I don't know if it'll hold up in court eventually, but by the time that's determined, the unfinished sentence hung in the air between them. By then, Harrison Orchard would be gone, bulldozed into oblivion to make way for luxury cabins and putting greens. I thought you should know," Ray finished awkwardly, "so you can prepare." "Prepare for what?" Sam asked bitterly. "To be thrown off my family's land? To watch 100 years of history erased for corporate profits?" The sheriff had no answer. With a parting grip on Sam's shoulder, he returned to his vehicle and drove away, leaving Sam to deliver the devastating news to his children and their allies. The reaction was, as expected, disbelief, outrage, desperate suggestions for last-ditch efforts to prevent the final takeover. Professor Abernathy immediately began making calls to colleagues in the State Attorney General's office. Leanne reached out to media contacts she'd cultivated during her tech career. Mark simply walked out into what remained of the orchard, his body rigid with barely contained fury. As darkness fell, the construction crews departed, leaving behind their equipment, now positioned deep within Harrison property, and a security detail to guard against vandalism. The protesters gradually dispersed as well, promising to return in greater numbers the next day, though everyone knew it would likely be too late. Sam found himself alone on the porch as the last light faded from the sky. The orchard that had been his family's legacy for 5 generations was now partially destroyed, with total annihilation scheduled for the following day. All their legal countermeasures had failed or been circumvented. Their community support, while heartfelt, had proven ineffective against Westridge's political connections and financial resources. In the growing darkness, Sam gazed out at his wounded land. The floodlights from the Westridge security perimeter cast harsh illumination over the areas already cleared, while the untouched sections of orchard remained in shadow, as if already fading into memory. Inside the house, he could hear Leanne's voice, tense with controlled emotion, as she spoke on the phone, still fighting despite the overwhelming odds. From somewhere in the orchard came the occasional crack of a branch. Mark, working by flashlight, probably salvaging what he could from the trees marked for tomorrow's destruction. The mysterious help promised by Walter Green's unknown contacts had not materialized. The team that was supposed to make contact tonight was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps they had assessed the situation and determined it was hopeless. Perhaps they had never existed at all, and Walter's offer had been nothing more than the well-meaning but empty gesture of a man with no real power to affect the outcome. Sam reached into his pocket and touched the business card with its single phone number. Should he call again? Beg for intervention from unknown parties who might or might not be able to help? The thoughts stuck in his throat. Harrisons didn't beg. Not from bankers during the Depression, not from nature during floods and droughts, and certainly not from shadowy operatives who might not even answer. As the night deepened around him, Sam Harrison faced the darkest moment of his long battle. not just the likely loss of his land, but the crushing weight of failure. He had promised generations of his ancestors that he would protect their legacy. He had raised his children to believe in the permanence of their heritage. And now, despite every effort, he was about to lose it all. The night grew quiet, except for the occasional call of an owl from the remaining trees and the distant hum of generators powering the Westridge security lights. Sam sat alone in the darkness, a solitary figure on the porch his grandfather had built, watching over an orchard that would soon exist only in memory. What he couldn't know was that, at that very moment, 7 figures dressed in tactical gear were moving silently through the woods that bordered the western edge of his property, approaching the Westridge security perimeter with the disciplined stealth that came from years of specialized training. The darkest hour of Harrison Orchard had arrived, but darkness, as Sam's grandfather used to say, is always deepest just before the dawn. Near midnight, Sam finally rose from his solitary vigil on the porch. His body ached from hours of stillness, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the weight in his chest. Tomorrow, according to Sheriff Daniels, the county commissioners would vote to seize his property immediately. By this time tomorrow night, he and his children might be forced to leave the only home his family had known for 5 generations. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen light still burned. Leanne sat at the table, her laptop open, dark circles under. Her eyes, as she continued making calls and sending emails to journalists, environmental activists, and anyone else who might help at this 11th hour. "You should get some rest," Sam told her gently. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Leanne looked up, her mother's determination etched on her exhausted face. "I've got a reporter from the state paper interested in the story. If we can get enough media attention before the commissioners vote—" "Leanne," Sam interrupted softly, "you've done everything humanly possible. We all have." She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I can't just give up, Dad." "It's not giving up to get some sleep," Sam replied, kissing the top of her head. "Katherine would have my hide if I let you run yourself into the ground." At the mention of her mother, Leanne's composure finally cracked. "She loved this place so much," she whispered. "I keep thinking about how she'd plant those little flags to mark where the new saplings would go each spring." Sam swallowed the lump in his throat. "Get some sleep, sweetheart. Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it together." After Leanne reluctantly headed upstairs, Sam checked on Mark, who had returned from the orchard and collapsed on the living room sofa, still fully dressed, a smudge of dirt on his cheek. Sam covered his son with a blanket, then made a final circuit of the downstairs, a habitual security check he'd performed every night for decades. At the kitchen window, he paused. Something was different about the Westridge security lights. In the distance, several appeared to be out, creating irregular patches of darkness in what had been a continuous perimeter of illumination. A power issue, perhaps, or something else. Sam was considering whether to investigate when headlights appeared on the gravel driveway, not approaching from the county road as expected, but from the rarely used back entrance that connected to an old logging trail through the western woods. The vehicle moved slowly, its lights dimmed, clearly trying to minimize its visibility. Instinctively, Sam reached for the old shotgun kept in the closet by the back door. Not loaded, but a potential deterrent. He stepped onto the porch just as the vehicle, a large black SUV with no markings, came to a stop beside his truck. The driver's door opened, and Walter Green emerged, looking far more alert and commanding than during his visit to the orchard. Gone was the retired hobbyist farmer effect, replaced by the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. "Evening, Sam," Walter said quietly, approaching the porch. "Sorry about the late hour." "Walter, what are you doing here?" Sam asked. "Lowering the shotgun. Bringing the help I promised," Walter replied, gesturing toward the SUV as the passenger doors opened. 4 individuals stepped out, 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in nondescript dark clothing. They moved with the fluid economy of athletes or dancers, spreading out slightly as they approached, scanning the surroundings with professional attention. Despite their civilian appearance, Sam recognized the military discipline in their posture immediately. "Sam Harrison, meet Commander Jack Reeves," Walter said, indicating a tall, weathered man in his late 40s. Reeves extended his hand. "Mr. Harrison, sorry we couldn't get here sooner." Sam shook the offered hand, feeling calluses that matched his own. "You're the team that was supposed to make contact tonight?" "Part of it," Reeves confirmed. "The rest are already at work." Walter stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Jack and I served together in naval special warfare. He and his team specialized in intelligence operations. After retiring, they formed a private organization that addresses certain situations that fall through the cracks of conventional justice. We've been monitoring Westridge Enterprises for some time," Reeves explained, his tone matter of fact. "Their operations in Michigan and Colorado raised red flags with several of our former colleagues who now work in corporate security oversight." The woman stepped forward, athletic, with quick, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Sarah Chen, Digital Intelligence. We have reason to believe Westridge has engaged in systematic corruption of local officials across multiple states, including bribery, blackmail, and fraudulent environmental reporting." Sam's mind struggled to process this unexpected development. "Are you saying you're some kind of vigilante group?" Reeves smiled slightly. "We prefer specialized problem solvers. Everything we do is technically legal, just unconventional. Walter contacted us about your situation because it fits a pattern we've been documenting." "And you can help?" Sam asked, hope warring with skepticism. "We already are," Chen replied, holding up a tablet displaying a schematic of what appeared to be the Westridge work site. Several areas were highlighted in red. "Our advance team has been gathering evidence from their equipment and mobile office for the past 3 hours. As if on cue, Sam's phone vibrated with an incoming text. The number was blocked, but the message was clear. Phase 1 complete. Evidence secured. Security neutralized. Ready for Phase 2. Reeves noticed Sam looking at his phone. "That's the rest of my team. They've completed the initial evidence collection." "What exactly does that mean?" Sam asked. Walter answered. "It means they've accessed the Westridge servers and secured documentation of their illegal activities, specifically related to your property and the county officials they've compromised. Most importantly," Chen added, "we've confirmed what we suspected. The water contamination report that formed the basis for their emergency court order was completely fabricated. They inserted false data into the county health department's system." Sam processed this information, hope beginning to kindle. "Can you prove that in a way that would stand up in court?" Reeves nodded. "Better than that. We can prove they knew the report was false when they submitted it to the judge. That's criminal fraud." Before Sam could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching from the county road drew everyone's attention. 2 unmarked SUVs, similar to Reeves's, were making their way up the driveway, followed by what appeared to be official government sedans. "Right on time," Reeves commented, checking his watch. "Who is that?" Sam asked, tension returning. "Friends," Walter assured him. "Very influential friends." The vehicles parked and several individuals emerged. One, a stern-looking woman in a dark suit, approached directly. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Special Agent Diana Foster, FBI. We have a warrant to search and secure the Westridge Enterprises work site based on evidence of interstate fraud and corruption." Sam stared in disbelief as she presented credentials and paperwork. Behind her, more agents were exiting vehicles, preparing equipment and communicating via radio. "How?" Sam began, but Reeves interrupted discreetly. Let's just say we have channels for delivering actionable intelligence to the appropriate authorities. Agent Foster continued. We've been building a case against Westridge for months, but lacked sufficient evidence for direct action until tonight. We'll need access to your property to secure the Westridge equipment and temporary structures. Of course, Sam agreed, still processing this dramatic reversal of fortune. The next hour unfolded in a blur of activity. FBI agents swarmed the Westridge worksite, confiscating computers, documents, and electronic equipment from the mobile office. The private security guards, looking confused and alarmed, were detained for questioning. Floodlights, now powered by FBI generators, illuminated the scene like daylight. Inside the farmhouse, Mark and Leanne had awakened to the commotion and joined their father on the porch, watching in amazement as the night transformed from their darkest hour to something entirely unexpected. "Dad, what's happening?" Mark asked, staring at the FBI. "Agents now placing evidence in sealed containers. Justice, I think," Sam replied, hardly believing it himself. Commander Reeves approached with Agent Foster, who appeared to have completed her initial assessment of the site. "Mr. Harrison, we'll need to take formal statements from you and your family tomorrow," Foster explained. "Based on what we've already discovered, Westridge has engaged in serious criminal activity to secure this property, including falsifying environmental reports and bribing county officials." "What does this mean for the orchard?" Sam asked. "The question that mattered most. The court order obtained by Westridge is based on fraudulent evidence and will be vacated immediately," Foster replied. "We've already contacted a federal judge for an emergency stay on all Westridge activities, pending criminal investigation. Your property rights remain intact." The relief that washed over Sam was so profound it nearly buckled his knees. Leanne gripped his arm, tears streaming down her face. Mark stood stunned, comprehension dawning slowly in his eyes. "You mean we're not losing the orchard?" he asked carefully, as if afraid speaking the hope aloud might jinx it. "Not only that," Reeves added, "but based on the evidence we've gathered, Westridge will likely be required to pay substantial damages for the destruction they've already caused." As dawn approached, the immediate crisis had been contained. The FBI had established a perimeter around the Westridge equipment and set up a temporary command post near the mobile office. Agent Foster had departed to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office, promising to return with additional details about the investigation and next steps. Sam and his children, along with Walter, Commander Reeves and his team, gathered in the farmhouse kitchen. The relief and exhaustion of the night's events had created a strange camaraderie among this unlikely group. "I still don't understand how all this came together," Sam admitted, pouring coffee for everyone, as the first light of day filtered through the windows. Walter exchanged glances with Reeves, then explained. "After I visited you yesterday, I contacted Jack immediately. His team had already been building a case against Westridge for their activities in other states, but needed clear evidence of their methods here. We had surveillance in place within hours," Reeves continued, "but needed to wait until they made a critical mistake when they fabricated the water contamination report and rushed the court order. They gave us exactly what we needed." "But how did you get the FBI involved so quickly?" Leanne asked, her analytical mind piecing together the logistics. Sarah Chen smiled slightly. "Let's just say several of our former colleagues now occupy significant positions in federal law enforcement. When we present them with actionable evidence of criminal activity, they move quickly." As sunrise painted the eastern sky, Sam stepped onto the porch once more, this time with a very different feeling than the despair of the previous evening. The Westridge equipment remained, but now sat idle and sealed with FBI evidence tape, transformed from instruments of destruction to exhibits in a criminal case. The damage they had already inflicted was substantial, perhaps 20 acres of younger trees, completely destroyed, with many more marked for removal. But the heart of Harrison Orchard remained intact. The heritage trees, the family cemetery, Katherine's rose garden, all had been spared. Walter joined him, standing silently for a moment as they surveyed the property in the golden morning light. "Those trees can be replanted," Walter said finally, nodding toward the cleared area. "Your family has rebuilt before." Sam nodded, thinking of his father after the flood of '62 and his grandfather during the drought years of the Dust Bowl. "Harrisons are stubborn that way." "And now you have a story to add to the family legacy," Walter observed. "The time you faced down a corporate giant and won." "With some help," Sam acknowledged, glancing at his old neighbor with new understanding. "I won't forget what you and your friends did, Walter." Walter shrugged. "Men like us, who've served our country in various capacities, we understand what's worth fighting for. Sometimes it's a flag or an ideal. Sometimes it's a piece of land that 5 generations have called home." Throughout the morning, news of the FBI raid spread rapidly. By noon, the county road was lined with vehicles as neighbors, supporters, and media gathered to witness the dramatic reversal of fortune. Sheriff Daniels arrived, looking both relieved and embarrassed, to inform Sam that the county commissioners had indefinitely postponed their emergency session regarding the property transfer. Professor Abernathy arrived with a team of environmental lawyers who immediately began documenting the damage for future litigation. Maria Vasquez organized volunteers to help salvage what they could from the destroyed sections of the orchard. Horace Washington brought a church group to provide food for the workers and FBI agents still processing the scene. By late afternoon, Sam received the news that transformed temporary relief into lasting security. The state attorney general had opened a formal investigation into corruption within Riverview County government, focusing on their relationship with Westridge Enterprises. All eminent domain proceedings related to the resort project were suspended pending review. As sunset approached, Commander Reeves and his team prepared to depart, their work transitioning now to formal channels of law enforcement and judicial process. "Will remain in contact through Walter," Reeves told Sam as they shook hands beside the black SUV. "Our intelligence suggests Westridge will be facing charges in multiple jurisdictions. Your testimony will be important, but you won't have to fight alone anymore." "How do I ever thank you?" Sam asked, the question inadequate for the magnitude of what they had done. Reeves glanced at the orchard, now bathed in golden evening light. "Keep growing those trees, Mr. Harrison. Some things in this world deserve to be preserved." After the team departed, Sam and his children hosted an impromptu gathering on the farmhouse porch. Professor Abernathy, Walter, and their closest neighbors shared a simple meal as darkness fell, the mood one of cautious celebration and profound gratitude. "I've been practicing law for 30 years, Professor Abernathy remarked, "and I've never seen a case turn around this dramatically. You had some powerful friends come to your aid, Sam." Sam glanced at Walter, who simply nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "The fight isn't over," Sam cautioned. "Ever practical. Westridge will have expensive lawyers trying to minimize the damage. But the playing field is level now," Leanne pointed out, "and we have the truth on our side." As the evening progressed, guests gradually departed, promising to return the next day to help with the recovery efforts. Eventually, only Sam and his children remained, along with Walter, who seemed reluctant to leave just yet. "There's something I've been wondering," Mark said, looking at Walter. "How did you know to contact Commander Reeves about our situation? What made you get involved?" Walter was silent for a moment, gazing out at the darkened orchard. "Your father doesn't know this," he said finally, "but my Elaine and I had our first date picking apples at Harrison Orchard 47 years ago this October. When I heard what Westridge was doing, I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy a place that meant so much to us. Sam stared at his neighbor, memories shifting into place. I remember now. You were that young Navy lieutenant home on leave. Elaine was the doctor's daughter. Walter nodded, a smile touching his weathered face. She always said the moment I reached up and picked that perfect Honeycrisp apple for her, she knew I was the one. The simple story hung in the air, a reminder of how places like Harrison Orchard wove themselves into the fabric of countless lives beyond just the family who owned it. Later, after Walter had gone and the children had retired for the night, Sam made one final walk through his orchard. The moon was rising, silvering the apple blossoms with gentle light. In the distance, he could see the FBI agents still guarding the Westridge equipment, but their presence now represented protection rather than threat. Sam stopped at Katherine's rose garden, imagining what she would say about the events of the past few days. She had always been the one to remind him that nothing worth having comes without a fight, but also that no one fights alone. Not really. 5 generations of Harrisons had tended this land, passing it down through blood and sweat and love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, replanting destroyed sections, navigating legal proceedings, rebuilding what had been damaged. But the orchard would survive, and someday, God willing, Mark's children would walk these same paths, continuing the legacy. As Sam turned back toward the farmhouse, now warm with lights against the darkness, he felt a sense of peace that had seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. The bulldozers had come for Harrison Orchard, but they had not reckoned with the power of unexpected allies, the strength of community, or the stubborn resilience of a family that had weathered a century of challenges on this land they called home. Sometimes, Sam reflected, the most powerful forces come together in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, even in the darkest hour, help arrives just when you need it most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.